If you haven't already rated and reviewed the Singletracks podcast in your podcast app, now's the time to do it. We're randomly selecting listener reviews to read on the show, and if we choose yours, you'll get a free Singletracks hat in the mail. Hit pause right now, write a quick review, and then listen to future episodes to find out if you won yourself a hat. Happy trails. Hey everybody, welcome to the Singletracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today I'm going to be looking back at some of my favorite podcast conversations of 2021. And if you've been following along with the podcast, you know we've interviewed a number of interesting folks in the mountain bike world, and we've covered a lot of ground here. You know, as the editor at Singletracks, we try to put all of our content into four sort of main categories, and those are trails, gear, progression, and community. And looking back, we actually covered all of those right here on the podcast as well. And so this week, I'm going to be recapping some of my favorite episodes that we did on the topic of mountain bike trails. And for those who have been following Singletracks for a really long time, you may recall that we started out actually as a website focused just on mountain bike trails. Leah and I started the site actually to share information about trails that we had ridden around the Southeast. And then later we started riding on the West Coast of the US. And so that's really how Singletracks got started. And we still love to cover trails and advocacy and trail building and the environment. And so those are all things that we have covered on the podcast this year. So one of my favorite episodes was a conversation that I had with Tyson Swayze. And Tyson is a mountain biker and trail builder who has lived in Moab, Utah for pretty much his whole life. And so it was really cool to be able to talk to Tyson and to really get an insider's perspective on the trails there in Moab. The thing that I found most interesting from our conversation was sort of some of the history of Moab that Tyson shared, talking about, you know, how Moab developed as a mountain bike destination, and really the fact that Moab was kind of the first mountain bike destination. Well, it seems like Moab was a mountain bike destination before there even were mountain bike destinations. And I find that so interesting because there are a lot of great places to ride around the country. But, you know, even in like the 90s, I remember, you know, that's all anybody talked about was like Moab. You know, I live in Georgia, I live on the East Coast, and people were talking about it like, you have to go ride Moab. What is it that you think makes the area so great for mountain biking?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it, I mean, what got Moab really like that early foot in the door with being an easy mecca is the Slick Rock Bike Trail. Was, you know, that was built by motorcycles and established, designated in 1969.
Wow.
So there was already this piece of single track. It's all on Slick Rock. So, you know, it was just painted on the rock, but it was already there. And then beyond that, kind of talking about, you know, we kind of mentioned like because of the uranium mining, there were just survey roads and mining roads going everywhere. And by the time the 80s hit, you know, those roads were starting to kind of get worn in and starting to erode away. So they were getting a little rougher, and they were more than just like these graded roads out through the desert. So that made them a little more exciting and a little more entertaining for biking on. And so that was a big part of it. Another thing that's pretty funny is when you talk to people who were here in the late 80s and early 90s, Above and Beyond Slick Rock, the first guidebook for the area, was already here. You know,
Wow.
I can't remember. It was Todd Campbell wrote that. Can't remember it. I mean, you come to Moab and you're just hearing about it, and you look on the counter and there's already like this inch thick book of like places to mountain bike.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was way ahead of the curve with writing that book. So from early on, they'd already figured out a lot of these routes. You know, it also helped that Rim Cyclery opened in 1983.
Oh, wow.
Like right on the cusp of like mountain bikes becoming a thing. You know, they were one of the first specialized dealerships in the country. And they were just an overall gear store for climbing and rafting and everything else, but quickly jumped on mountain biking and kind of started pushing that for the area.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that Slick Rock has been around since what, the late 60s? How did the
Yeah.
first trails get built? Like, were they kind of social trails that people in town were riding, or was there like an official push to like get actual trails built in the area?
Yeah, through, up until pretty much 2000, all through the 90s, what was making Moab famous was all the old Jeep roads, all the old
Hmm.
mining roads. We had 9 miles of single track in the area that consisted of kind of what's still our most advanced trails, which is Porcupine Rim,
Hmm.
um, now more commonly known as the bottom of the whole enchilada, uh, Jackson Trail out on Amosabac, and the Portal Trail. And beyond that, there was almost nothing. There was a
Hmm.
couple of moto single track trails that had been built, but um, it was really like Amosabac Jeep Road and Porcupine Rim keeping that mountain bike mecca kind of status going.
Hmm.
Intel Fruta really, I think, was one of the big turning points for Moab. Fruta started building mountain bike single track,
Uh-huh.
and I think that was like a big kind of like, wait, you can do that? That's a thing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember I was working at Rim Cyclery at that time. I was in high school, and all the bike shops were noticing this little bit of a dip in visitation, and it's
Hmm.
because people coming from Denver weren't going as far because Fruita had all this single track all of a sudden, and
Right.
it wasn't all this gnarly Jeep road that we had around here. So it was a little easier too for people and a little less rough on the bikes and body.
Hmm.
Um, so that is really what spurred Grand County Trail Mix to become formed. And Grand County Trail Mix is a county committee that represents all non-motorized recreation for the area.
Hmm.
So it's hiking, it's biking, it's equestrian use, uh,
Okay.
snow sport, climbing access. And they started working to develop single track however they could.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of the beginning of it, was around late 90s or early 2000s, and that they didn't really gain a whole lot of traction until 2010 is when we really started building a lot of single track.
Hmm.
You asked about like user created trails versus kind of how they were built, and really we haven't had a lot of user created trails. Some of the slick rock routes in the area
Hmm.
were kind of user created. The whole enchilada, or the original route, was a user created route using kind
Hmm.
of existing hiking trails and some cow trails
Yeah.
that kind of over the years got parts of it got closed and then rebuilt and
Hmm.
by the land agencies. So, but most of the bulk of our trail systems have been done legally and fully designed and everything.
Well, next up on my list of favorite conversations from the year is actually someone who introduced me to Tyson, Ashley Korenblatt. So, Ashley also is based in Moab, and she's the CEO of Western Spirit Cycling Adventures and founder of Outer Bike. And she's also the managing director of Public Land Solutions, which is a nonprofit that helps with recreation planning and coordination. Basically, it's a group that helps get mountain bike trails built. And she also worked as an IMBA board chair. So Ashley had a lot of things to share about how trails get built. And she really takes sort of a pragmatic approach to getting trails built, understanding that there are a number of different stakeholders in various communities. Some of them are mountain bikers and they're stoked to have trails. Others not so much, and they may have competing interests that say we don't need trails, or we'd rather spend money on something else or use land for different purposes. So perhaps the most interesting topic that we discussed in our interview was about the public land solution stance on mountain bikes in wilderness. And this has become a kind of a controversial opinion among mountain bikers. Even mountain bikers don't agree on whether this is something that should be pursued. Obviously, there are groups like the Sustainable Trails Coalition, who we have interviewed on the show before and who have shared opinion pieces on Singletracks as well, who are advocating for bikes in wilderness, while Public Land Solutions is actually saying that we don't need that access. So here's what Ashley had to say about that. Like, how do other outside groups see mountain bikers? Like, are there ways that we can improve kind of, I guess, the way we're seen by other groups in terms of being champions of the environment and conservation? Or are there other strategies we could use to get us more access to lands and to have these communities trust mountain bikers more?
Sure. So now we're going to get to wilderness here in a second, but it is, well, let's just go to wilderness. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. What is the PLS stance on wilderness access for mountain bikes?
We do not believe mountain bikes should be in wilderness, and neither does IMBA. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of misunderstanding about that. But when you ask yourself as a mountain biker whether you think a bike should be allowed in wilderness, you need to do two calculations. And the first one involves mileage. So let's look at how many miles of trail there is in wilderness or that's kind of affected by wilderness right now.
Okay.
And if anyone in the whole bike industry would benefit financially from access to wilderness, it would be me. My day job is to take people on backcountry trips in remote locations, right? And so when I do that calculation, I see the 100,000 miles of ready-to-ride trail in the U.S. right now, and I see about 1,000 miles, maybe, of wilderness. And even maybe 1,500 if you stretch it to some really unlikely wilderness bills that might someday happen but are super unlikely, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So
that's incredibly small. I mean, is that
right?
And these are trails that I guess exist for hiking. I mean, is most of wilderness then just no trail, nothing? I mean, it's just land. Is that kind of the status?
No, there are historic trails through a lot of these lands, but they are mostly point-to-point trails. So, there's some places in Montana that Montana is a lot of basin and range, so relatively small mountain ranges and then big basins. In almost every range, there's a trail that goes through that range, right? And that was created a long time ago. And some of them have some good riding on them, and some of them have 3 45-minute hike bikes and a 4-hour car shuttle to get back to your car,
Right.
So, and the number of people that can really do that is pretty darn small. So
yeah,
I'm not saying that some of those trails we want to keep and they make great aspirational big deal rides, but are they economic drivers? Not really. Not enough people can do them, and they don't concentrate use in a certain town. They spread it out too much over, there's a lot of reasons why this don't work. But the main point is you need to make a decision. Are you going to the mat for that 1,000 miles? Do you think that we should use all our resources to try to join Senator Lee in his effort to get bikes in wilderness that the Sustainable Trails Coalition pushed? Or are you more interested in the hundreds of thousands of other miles that we can build?
Is this then, I mean, to tie back to the previous question, I mean, is this affecting then sort of the groups that we work with, that it actually is hurting us by supporting bikes in wilderness?
Right. So that's the second calculation that you have to make. And that is, Senator Bennett from Colorado put it best. There's only two kinds of people on the planet right now: people working to fix climate change and people in the way. So which one do you want to be? And if you decide that you really want to ride your bike in that 1,000 miles of wilderness, then you're going to be one of those people in the way because the Wilderness Act is the founding legislation for the modern environmental movement. And because bringing it to the Biden administration, they're working on this 30 by 30 initiative, protecting 30% of the public of land by the year 2030.
Okay.
that's a good thing for mountain bikers. The more green space there is, the more places there will be to ride. So you shouldn't think that the word protection means no access. By protection, they mean that we're just not going to drill it or dig it up or otherwise poison it.
Yeah.
So land in its natural state is a good thing for mountain bikers, but you can't really be, if you want bikes in wilderness, you're not for 30 by 30, and you're on the wrong side of a whole bunch of conservation organizations that have a whole bunch more members than we do mountain bikers.
So another group of folks that I always enjoy speaking with are mountain bike trail builders. And perhaps none are better known than Tony Boone. Tony's been building mountain bike trails for more than 30 years, and he literally helped write the book on the topic, IMBA's Guide to Building Sweet Singletrack. And so Tony now is still building trails, and he's actually teaching a college level trail building class in Colorado. And so I asked Tony a number of questions about trail building. One of the things I wanted to understand is how mountain bike trail building has changed and evolved over the last decade. Here's what Tony had to say.
Well, I'll say this. We always focus on sustainability. So I would say that most of the trails I've built over the last 35 years are still in really good condition. And I feel most accomplished about that. Even though I was a mountain biker and even though I was younger, I never built trails out of ego. I did not build my trails to get the Instagram shot and then the trail fall apart in 6 months. I built because I built to what my clients asked me to build. If they wanted a green trail and I like to ride Black Diamond, guess what I built them? I built them a green trail. If they wanted a black, and my crew likes to ride green and I like to green, I still built them a black. Refresh my question on that.
Well, I guess the follow-up question to that, we're talking about sort of how the early trails compared to trails being built today. And it sounds like you had a pretty firm understanding of, what is sustainable and that sort of thing. How did you learn that? How did you establish those best practices early on?
Well, there was definitely some trial and error, but I tried in the 90s to take quite a few trainings. My mentor was Jim Angel. He's the one that told me you need to get inside of the head of the trail user. And he's also the one that told me that people don't need trails, the land does. We can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But also just a variety of people like Hugh Duffy, some other folks in National Park Service. When they would offer these trainings, I would go take them. And, luckily the county would pretty much pay for me to do that. There was also a variety of private projects where I had friends and we would basically build trails on their property. So, I would say, how have the trails that I've built changed over the year? Number one, I think I've learned a lot. I definitely have learned from my mistakes where I pushed grades and poor soils, or whether I had change in flows too abruptly that led to, stutter bumps or braking bumps before the corner. But, over the years, as you learn that, the interesting thing about that is you really never quit learning.
Yeah.
Because you're at a new site with new topography, new soils, different kinds of natural and cultural resource concerns. But the other way, really, that trails, I think, have changed over time is those projects that we were bidding on in the 90s rarely had a bike component or mountain bikers as stakeholders. So from a flow trail standpoint, you would say those trails are boring today for some people. However, as time went on, you saw more of that bike optimized theory invested into these trails. Many clients, these land managers that received grants for these trail projects written by the mountain bike advocacy clubs allowed those mountain bikers to, really develop a trail that satisfied those needs of the mountain bikers. And of course, in the last 10 years, especially with the just off the world Disneyland stuff that they've accomplished in Northwest Arkansas, it's just mind blowing how we've been allowed to push the evolution of trails on public lands. I mean, here's an example. I remember, I think it was the Sharp Trail. No, it was the Ringtail Trail, which is outside of Denver. I did it for Douglas County Parks and Open Space. And I thought, I was always into rolling grade dips because they get water off the trail, but yet all mountain bikers can kind of boost over them.
Right.
Beginners can, advanced can, depending on how fast you're going. You could launch a long ways, or you could just get weightless a little bit. And I put two of them close together because I wanted to double it, right?
Right.
And I got comments and concern. They're too close together. The horses are not going to like them. That is basically, they needed to go back and take one out. And it was true. I'd kind of pushed it. My crew and I, maybe we had a little bit of ego to it, and we kind of, valued our mountain bike thrill over that of the horses, the equestrians, and the hikers. But, those types of trails back then were somewhat of a new thing. And now, of course, you got contracts going out to bid that are like, we want a flow trail, or, we want a jump trail.
So another big theme for Singletracks is the environment. And so I also wanted to ask Tony about how trail building fits into the idea of sustainability and land stewardship. And here's what he had to say about that. Well, earlier in our conversation, you quoted Jim Angel saying that people don't need trails, the land does. I'm interested to know, what does that mean to you?
What does that mean to you?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out, honestly. And that's why I wanted to ask you. I mean, how does the land need trails?
Yeah, so it does perplex many people, except land managers and trail builders, and what it says. And he told me this in 1993. His company was Core Plan. He's passed away now. A crusty old Scotch drinker, Jim. But this thing has stuck with me, and I've shared it with literally thousands of people around the world. And his statement is, people don't need trails, the land does. So have you ever been to a new park that doesn't really have a trail system and people are just out there wandering wherever they want?
No, you don't see that often. I mean, there are plenty of places where the land is preserved and there is no sort of access to it.
We have a number of places in Colorado that if you pull up to the parking lot, you might have 20 choices of trails to go up that fall line. Not a single one of them designed contour.
Yeah.
They were trails created by social use. People not really thinking or educated enough to know that they're potentially harming the land. They just want to get up to that high point and take a picture of the beautiful mountains. 1 million people do that over the decades, and now you got 20, 30 trails going up. It looks like a bowl of spaghetti. Okay. Same thing going down to like a water feature. Like, oh, everybody's got to get to the creek or the lake. And so basically you end up having non-sustainable trails that create a loss of soil, which is one of our key natural resources. Ultimately, you can impact the vegetation, the wildlife habitat, and essentially ruin an area. That's where we got that saying, our area is loved to death. People aren't really doing it on purpose, but once you see a couple social trails, or you see a couple pieces of litter, I think human nature is just to not be so concerned about creating another hiker trail or walking off trail or dropping that gum wrapper. It's litter breeds litter, social trails breed social trails. So then you have rogue trails. Many trails were built at night in many places. You look at Fruta and Troy Rarick out there with Over the Edge Bike Shop. All those trails on 18 Road were illegal. Now they're all designated trails. People from around the world seek out that place. That place was a defunct, bankrupt little farming community. Now it's expensive to live there, and it's a cool as hell place to live.
So sticking with the environmental theme, one of the folks we interviewed this year is a guy named Doug Blease, who is located in Scotland. He's a mountain biker and also an environmental researcher. He's also a member of IMBA Europe. So one of the things that mountain bikers often get blamed for unnecessarily is trail erosion. And it seems to be a big topic of debate among different user groups. And so that was one of the first things I asked Doug was about the potential types of environmental impact that erosion can have on trails. And here's what he had to say. Well, let's talk about some of the specific potential types of environmental impacts that are associated with trails. And the most obvious one to most mountain bikers is erosion and soil compaction. What are some of the concerns here that are specific to mountain bikes as opposed to other groups like, hikers or equestrians?
Oh, that's really interesting. And I've kind of followed the hiker, equestrian, mountain biker comparison, division, argument, debate
yes,
for quite a while. And I find it, because I have a background in studying countryside management, and a big part of that is access. Mm-hmm. And Scotland's access laws are really open and quite sort of world leading in that respect. Mm-hmm. It's something that, a countryside management geek like me kind of watch from the sidelines with great interest and, try and be impartial. But I suppose in one way we could look at erosion and soil compaction. I believe that there's enough studies out there now that says that there's no significant difference in erosion between mountain bikers, horse riders, and hikers or trail runners.
Okay.
But when I look at that, I think, has that been looked at on the basis of a constructed, and what we probably don't add in there is then every time we dig a wild trail, essentially that's another form of erosion. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not even riding the bike at that time. It's just people on the ground digging.
Yeah.
So we're eroding the land before we even ride it. So that, when we look at those studies, I kind of like the scientist in me then says, well, what hasn't been accounted for in that study? If it's just tire tread on a trail, then bikes probably don't erode trails more than any other land use. So once you start to scrutinize it, I think it starts to unravel a little bit, and maybe not totally in mountain bikers' favor. A badly dug a natural trail, which drains really badly, can be really erosive. I mean, essentially, we can see trails now that, like a fall line trail straight down a hill, that you've just dug yourself a stream.
Yeah.
It will just, when it rains, it will run with water, and whether you're riding or not, it's eroding.
Right. And when we look at that too, it's like how much more could, one really strong rainfall erode an area compared to, 100 or 1,000 passes by a biker or a hiker. I mean, what we're really talking about is water and water management and kind of making sure you're accounting for that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I was recently sent, there was an IMBA video on trail construction and the angles of fall dependent on the gradient of the hill, and it just made complete sense. And, you just think, oh wow, if we could only get every trail digger, whether they have permission or not, to sit through the hour and 20 minutes of that video, that would be incredible.
I also asked Doug about what we can do as individuals to minimize the impact of our rides when we do go out. Here's what he had to say. Even if we're not building trails, what can we do as riders to minimize our impact, aside from, having an impact and then like mitigating it elsewhere? What can we do actually on our rides? Like, is skidding bad? Like, is that the thing that we should stop skidding, or, should we avoid wet trails? I mean, it seems like there are, even just within the way that we choose to ride, there are ways that we can minimize our impact. What are some of the top ones, the ones you think would be like kind of the most important?
Skids and wheelies are just what it's all about, surely. if you like to skid, but then at the same time you're not engaging with your local trail builders or trail association, then you're having you're not even having an environmental impact, you're having a social impact,
right?
Because you're expecting somebody else to come and fix that corner that you just skidded around.
Yeah. So
it's like this little bit of well, hey, if that's the kind of person you are, I don't know any mountain bikers like that. So we're talking to a mountain bike audience.
Right.
Yeah. The more skids you do, the more you should donate to your trail association.
Yeah. But again, that's, I mean, I guess what you're saying too is, that you don't necessarily have to to stop skidding. I mean, you can still have fun, but as long as you're giving back, as long as you're also the one digging and putting the trail back to the way it was.
Yeah. One of the questions I asked the riding community when we kind of first got started with the Trail Association was, does the weather dictate where you choose to ride? And of course, lots of people might not have an immediate choice of where they ride based on time or location. Mm-hmm. But generally, I think the way to minimize our impacts, really, in the context of where I live and the lack of formally built trail infrastructure, which has got a durable tread and is drained correctly, et cetera, we're relying on our natural capital to provide us trails. Mm-hmm. So therefore, for the people that know me and listen to this podcast and might just take one thing from this, in the context of Scotland, really, why not find out more about the habitat you're riding in, what the natural features are, mm-hmm. and really that should enhance your experience, but also it will give you that sense of custodianship over the land, and you might choose, your riding choices will dictate. Will be dictated by the environment and what it can cope with. Mm-hmm. So we deal with a lot of wet weather, but actually we get this really great run of beautiful dry weather that can take us right through summer, autumn, and into early winter. And so you can ride any trail without really thinking of an environmental impact of erosion. But then suddenly it starts to rain and snow, and it's pretty wet and horrible. And it's like, okay, so what do you choose to do? Do you choose to trash the trail so that it's completely trashed for everybody for the rest of the spring, just so that you can have a ride because it's the weekend and you have to ride, or other choices you can make? So there's that element in terms of like the land, like learn more about where you're riding, what lives there, and what should be avoided, and then learn more about what the type of geology that you're riding on and how that is affected by weather conditions, if you happen to live in a part of the world like me, which is very negatively affected by weather conditions.
And
global impacts, thinking about transport and travel, that has a carbon output, your purchasing decisions. Those are the really big hitters that you can have to minimize the impact of mountain biking on the planet. Those should never be forgotten. It's not all just about badly dug or badly ridden trails.
Yeah. So over the summer, we started a podcast series within the podcast called Ride Like a Local. And one of the first destinations that we focused on is Bentonville, Arkansas, in northwest Arkansas, because obviously that's an area that's growing a lot. We're hearing a lot more about it, but not everybody has had a chance to ride there yet. So we reached out to Anya Bruin, who is a Northwest Arkansas local, who is the education program manager for Bike Northwest Arkansas. And so we talked about what makes Arkansas unique in terms of a mountain bike destination. And one of the things that Anya mentioned is that Northwest Arkansas is much more affordable in a lot of cases than some of the traditional mountain bike destinations. Here's what she had to say. Just thinking about Northwest Arkansas as a destination, it seems to be unique in terms of like how accessible and affordable trip there would be compared to, going somewhere like more resort style or a place like that, thinking out west, Colorado or Utah or somewhere like that, where people are going to spend a good bit more to stay and to access the trails and all that kind of thing. It seems like Arkansas is set up to be much more affordable and accessible.
I think so. I've been to other places and I know that it's, sometimes you got to pay to get a shuttle here and you got to pay to get a shuttle there and passes for the lift. We don't have any lifts, so you don't need passes. Right. You just need legs.
Yeah. Or you can bring your e-bike. So, I mean, that's unusual as well
You
for a lot
can
of
and you
destinations.
should bring your e-bike.
Right. So if you need a shuttle, bring your own and you'll be fine. Sweet. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I always ask folks in the Ride Like a Local series is about new trails and developments. And in Northwest Arkansas, it seems like every month there's a new epic trail system that opens up. In fact, we do a monthly recap on the website of a list of all the new mountain bike trails that have opened around the world. And it's rare, literally, that there's not a month where Northwest Arkansas or the state of Arkansas doesn't get a mention. So here's what Anya had to say about some of the newest trails and developments there. Well, this potentially could be a very long-winded answer, but I want to know about plans to expand or improve trails in the area. I don't imagine things are going to be slowing down anytime soon. So what are some of the bigger or more interesting projects that are coming up in the future?
They're always expanding. Areas, like I said, areas outside the main corridor are a potential for getting in on the action. There was a system at Mount Nebo that just opened up recently. And then, of course, there was an enduro race that happened there pretty close to that opening. Little towns like Huntsville. I love Huntsville. It's beautiful and mountainous, like some of the other places wish that they were. And a lot of it is, undeveloped private owned land. There's a huge potential in that area. As far as projects that are on the radar, there are things that I don't have any idea are on the radar.
Right. Yeah. You just show up and they're like, hey, new trail.
Yeah. You said it's hard to keep up from an outsider's perspective. I'm an insider and I can't keep up.
Yeah, I bet.
It's always on the horizon to try something new, to try something different. A lot of these projects are, where some of these companies kind of cut their teeth and learned to do what they do. And so going back and reworking those projects as they have new techniques or new ideas that they want to try out, it's always expanding. It's never not. There's a lot of momentum for creating even more family-friendly places where there are all the amenities that a family would want, bathrooms, changing areas, plenty of water, parking, multiple level trails, bike park kind of things, and just trying to create, the best iteration of what a family would want out of one space.
Yeah.
There's always room for improvement, and there are some crazy ideas out there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the sense that I get is that, at this point, there's plenty of mileage. And that's not to say that big trail projects aren't still being opened. And I'm sure there are more being planned. But it seems like what I've seen also is just more of these kind of, as you alluded to, they're more like showpieces for the builders and doing things that are really unique, like riding through a waterfall or through a helicopter or whatever, stuff that you're not going to find anywhere else, and kind of also filling in, like you said, the gaps in terms of we don't have an enduro trail. I mean, we've got a few enduro-y type things, but let's build an enduro trail that's the enduro spot, and making sure that there is something for everyone. So after talking to Doug about mountain biking and the environment, he actually referred me to a friend, a colleague of his named Douglas Cartree, who is also in Scotland, but he's done some mountain bike studies and consulted. And one of the things that we talked about was the impact on wildlife that mountain bikers may have. And this is kind of a newer one. Over the years, like I said, a lot of outside groups have blamed mountain bikers for problems with erosion. And, there's been countless studies that have sort of refuted that and said, well, mountain biking is on par with a lot of other trail uses. And so these other user groups can't necessarily single out bikers for that. But so the newer argument is that mountain bikes are more disruptive to wildlife, just due to the distances that riders can travel, and the speeds that they carry. And so the question I asked Douglas was, is that true? Do mountain bikers tend to bother animals more than other trail users do? And this is what he had to say. I want to ask you, do mountain bikers tend to bother animals more than other trail users, or is it about the same for like hikers or people on horses or things like that?
So it varies. Certainly with capercaillie, they don't necessarily disturb them as much as other users. It's thought that other forest users, such as dog walkers, probably cause the biggest disturbance, with dogs off leads running through the forest, and people walking or moving quite slowly. Whereas mountain bikers, who move quite quickly through the forest, they might, scare that animal initially, but actually because they're gone reasonably quickly. Things can then kind of return to normal, rather than that person walking. It takes quite a long time to move out with the area. But the biggest issue that mountain bikers have is how far we can travel. So we can travel really deep into the forest onto trails that maybe get used once a week. So that's when we kind of start to see issues, is on these trails that are further into the forest, which is kind of where species like capercaillie are inhabiting, away from people. So they're kind of more used to people on regularly used trails, but it's on these sort of trails that are deep in the forest that they have issues, because they're not expecting anything, basically. So it's that's kind of that's where mountain bikers pose an issue. So getting back to the Ride Like a Local series, one of my favorite interviews of this year was with Todd Branham. And Todd and I have known each other for a while. He's been on the podcast before, but Todd lives in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. He's a professional trail builder. He also directs a number of big races and events in the Pisgah area, including the Pisgah Stage Race. And so this was one of those interviews where I had a good bit of knowledge about the trails. I've ridden in Pisgah for many, many years, but there's always something new. And so when I asked Todd if there were plans to expand or improve trails in the area, his answer sort of caught me by surprise. Here's what he had to say. Well, you mentioned that generally there aren't plans to expand or add new trails within the forest, other than maybe some connectors here or there, a lot of rework being done. So what are kind of the plans to expand or improve trails? And are there trails being built outside the forest, maybe on private land or other areas like that in the future?
Yeah, so there are definitely some, it's interesting you asked that, because there is a big push in Transylvania County in particular to go to our western part of the county, to Gorges State Park, which is another fantastic park, has no trails in it though. And there's been a big push to put trails in there over the years to give some relief to DuPont and Pisgah. Okay. But nothing's happened. So recently, there's a private owner that backs up to Gorges that owns 92 acres that has trails in there, that wants to improve them and then donate it to the Conservancy for public access. So, because again, over in that area, there's just not a lot, and there needs to be something over there. So that's exciting. Tons of private stuff going on, tons of it. I mean, everywhere. But man, the most exciting thing that I think is going on is over in the Old Fort area. There is a collaboration between the U.S. Forest Service and something called the G5 Collective that has put together and been working on now for 5 years a master plan for trails in the Old Fort area. And I hope everybody's sitting down for this, but the master plan calls for 42 miles of new trail in the Pisgah National Forest.
That's incredible.
42 miles, yeah. So it's interesting, again, if you stand back and look at the management of the Forest Service and look at everything we've been talking about today and how Brevard is a hot spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 3 districts of Pisgah. There's you've got the Pisgah district, which is Brevard up to the Parkway, Bent Creek to Asheville. And then you've got the district we're talking about now, the Grandfather district,
Mm-hmm.
which is Old Fort and up towards the Boone. And then you've got the Boone, which is Appalachian district up in that area. Okay, so 3 different districts. In the Grandfather district, it's interesting that the Forest Service looks at what's going on with Brevard, has nothing to do with Brevard, and says, you guys got a lot of problems with we work together, but the Forest Service is not Brevard,
Mm-hmm.
but yet everybody's coming to the Forest Service. So by default, to the lands to play. So by default, Brevard has this economic boom all of a sudden of what do we do with all these people? Where do they stay? How do we feed them? What do we do? Oh my God, the roads are falling apart. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me to see the Forest Service kind of come to the rescue in the lonely town of Old Fort, which is deprived of any business and has nothing, but is rich in the fact that they are close to Forest Service lands. So listen up, folks. If you want to buy any property, buy it in an Old Fort, because it is going to become the next Brevard. You are going to be able to ride out of Old Fort into the Forest Service and have 42 new miles on top of the 12 that are already there.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
And in fact, 3.5 of this has already been built, and the next phase will be done in 2022, supposedly.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. And Old Fort, that's where Kitsbow is, right?
That is. Kitsbow, Hillman Brewery just opened up there. Old Fort is changing at an unbelievable rate.
Mm.
I can't believe it. There's a place called the Pisgah Ride Room or Ride House that has great food down. Old Fort has changed so much in the last 3 years. It's amazing. And to see what it's going to become, it blows my mind.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But that's very exciting news because it's new trail in the Forest Service.
Yeah.
And the key is this. It goes back to a question you asked earlier. What type of trails are they building?
Mm-hmm.
Out of the 42 miles, 20 of it is beginner intermediate.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's really different.
And in fact, optimize for hand bikes, which is the bikes you sit on and use with your hands.
Yeah.
So, and then they have all the way up to downhill specific trails, all the way to stuff connecting up to Heartbreak Ridge at the Parkway that's going to be uber gnarly.
Wow.
So it's a masterpiece.
The timing on Todd's response was actually really good because this trail system actually hadn't been officially announced yet. And so listeners of the podcast got an early take on that new trail system. And we're really stoked to see that actually be built and hopefully visit it really soon. Okay, and so finally, another one of the Ride Like a Local conversations was with Kevin Adams. And Kevin is someone that we've known for many years. He's with the Verde Valley Cyclist Coalition, which is a trail group that is in the Sedona, Arizona area. And so many riders have heard about Sedona, have wanted to ride there, or have maybe been and really enjoyed the trails. And it's always great to hear from Kevin. He's super enthusiastic about the trails and promoting the area. One of the questions I asked that got a surprising response was about some of the lesser known trails in Sedona. And here's what Kevin had to say. Well, what are some of the lesser known trails where riders can get away from the crowds, or are those like local only kind of things you don't want to share?
Oh, well, the trails in Sedona and the village of Oak Creek draw about 3 million annual visitors on them.
Wow.
But yeah, a lot of people will come here on their way to the Grand Canyon or back, or just to come here just to for the Red Rocks. And but I've noticed that once you get about 3/8 of a mile from a trailhead, the traffic goes down tremendously. And with over 400 miles of trail, just right in the Red Rock Ranger District, you know, not all of that's open to mountain biking, of course, because some of it's in wilderness, but, you know, there's over 400 miles of trail. There's even more in the Verde region of the Prescott National Forest, the other side of the Verde River. It's not hard to escape the crowds. And Jeff, if you truly want solitude, I recommend the Dead Horse State Park trails in Cottonwood. 10% of the trail mileage there is in the state park, and 90% is the Coconino National Forest. And I did a 15-mile ride there Saturday. It was low, upper 70s, no humidity, just a gorgeous day. The only people I saw on the whole 15-mile ride were the other riders in my group.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's surprising, but good to know that most people don't make it too far past the trailheads, and so I guess that sounds like even if you pull up and a parking lot looks really full, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be running into a lot of people once you get out there a little bit.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not hard to find solitude here.
And after hearing that answer from Kevin, I actually started noticing this myself. I went for a trail run in the Smoky Mountains National Park over the summer, and, you know, pulled up to the trailhead. The parking lot is full. There's people and families and people walking around on the trails. And so I headed out on the trail, saw a number of people, but literally within a quarter of a mile or so, there were no more people. Everybody just kind of disappeared, and I was off on my own. And so that's the good news for us as bikers, that we can get out there and get away from the crowds pretty easily, even in a really popular place like Sedona. Another thing that Kevin talked a bit about was where people are staying in Sedona. And this is becoming a more contentious issue of late in tourist destinations like Sedona and Crested Butte and some smaller mountain towns in the West, where a lot of folks are out camping. They're staying in vans. There are Airbnb rentals. And so I asked Kevin about some of the camping and Airbnb options in Sedona, and he actually painted a pretty good picture. Here's what he had to say. So what about places for people to stay? Is there camping available sort of outside of town? And also, I'd like to know about like sort of bike-friendly hotels or other options for lodging.
Sure. There's dispersed dry camping in the national forest outside the Sedona city limits here, or like outside of the village of Oak Creek. And the Forest Service has several campgrounds up in Oak Creek Canyon, along with campsites with showers at Dead Horse State Park in Cottonwood. There's also some RV parks in Camp Verde, Cottonwood, and Sedona, if that's your thing. Okay. And, you know, just note that especially during the busy season, you know, in the spring and the fall, many of these campgrounds and RV parks fill up, so reserve early. And then, as we talked about earlier, many of the Sedona hotels and VOC hotels cater to mountain bikers. Some of them have bike wash and bike fix-it stations, also, and they also contribute to the trail maintenance as Sedona Trailkeeper, as I talked about before. Vacation rentals are a touchy subject here locally. The Arizona State Legislature took away the ability to regulate them locally, and locals are concerned that some neighborhoods are turning into retail hotel establishments.
Yeah.
So if you go the vacation rental route, just be respectful and manage. And imagine if you lived next door to a place that had loud parties at any given evening. So I mean, I have a vacation rental at the next house down from us. Fortunately, it's far enough away that we don't normally hear them, but I do hear them when I'm out walking our dog. And every now and again, there'll be a bunch of mountain bikes there, and I'll holler on over to them, "Where are you guys riding?" and this kind of stuff. And most of the time, you know, my wife's like, "Well, how come? You know, is it the vacation rental?" And you know, I didn't tell her about the time that 20 women rented it, and it had a hot tub. It was night. I'm walking the dog, and they were all out in the hot tub and in and out of the hot tub. That poor dog got the longest walk of his life.
That can be distracting.
Yes. I mean, there's there's no shortage of places to stay here, and like I said earlier, and in Sedona, in the village of Oak Creek, you can ride to the ride. It's that cool,
Mm-hmm.
and you come back from the ride, the hotel, like Sedona Real, Arabella, the Hilton, they all have bike wash stations, bike fix-it stations, so I mean they really they recognize that mountain bikers are coming here,
Mm-hmm.
and and if they have the amenities, they'll attract them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you make a good point too about just keeping in mind, like being respectful if you are visiting from out of town, and hopefully it's not the mountain bikers that are having the loud parties at the vacation rentals. And I've heard from a number of uh, cities and towns that do attract mountain bike tourists. Mountain bikers generally have a pretty good reputation in terms of like, we're out riding hard all day. And then by the time we get back, maybe we'll have a couple beers, but we're tired. We want to go to sleep
Yeah,
after a long day of riding.
yeah,
So hopefully that's the case. And mountain bikers will continue to be welcome in places like Sedona.
yeah. Well, and I think it's more, just if you live in a residential neighborhood, the last thing you want is to be surrounded by houses that are really hotels.
Finally, I also asked Kevin about plans for expanding or improving trails in the Sedona area. And his answer blew me away by the amount of trail that is planned to be built in the area in the next several years. What are the plans to expand or improve trails within the next year or two? Are there new trails coming online, or some of the trails being reworked that people should know about?
Yep. In both forests, the Red Rock Ranger District of the Coconino is working on the NEPA to improve the trail system in the Turkey Creek area of the
Hmm.
village of Oak Creek. And we expect to break ground as early as our 2022-2023 field season.
Okay.
This past field season saw the Red Rock Ranger District construct two new trails. I talked about them earlier, Rabbit Ears and Little Rock. And the 29-mile Western Gateway Trail system in West Sedona was completed in March 2020. And it broke ground November 8th, 2018, and was done in just 2 seasons.
Wow.
And then across the Verde River in the Prescott National Forest, the Verde Ranger District's in the process of implementing what they call their VTAP, Verde Trails and Access Plan. That's
Hmm.
180 miles of new trail going in the Verde over the next decade or so.
Whoa.
Yeah, and the first VTAP project, the Blowout Wash, uh, over the last 2 seasons, they've completed 14 miles of new trail, and that's near Cottonwood and Clarkdale. And the
Hmm.
views from up there, you get up to about 4,200 feet. You see the entire Verde Valley. You see Sedona. You see the San Francisco Peaks up in Flagstaff. I mean, it's just gorgeous. And
Wow.
don't get me wrong. Sedona is gorgeous too, the iconic Red Rock views. But you don't see the San Francisco Peaks anywhere unless you go way, way, way up into the
Hmm.
wilderness. And you
Yeah.
don't see the entire Verde Valley like you do over there. And then when they finish their VTAP, it's going to be followed by their VRAP, the Verde Recreation Access Plan, and that's going to add another 120 miles of trail over there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and mountain bikers are going to be able to ride from near the top of Mingham's Mountain, that's a little over 7,000 feet elevation,
Hmm.
drop over 4,000 feet on 9 miles of single track to the Verde River, cross into Dead Horse State Park, and ride the Lime Keel Trail to Sedona. That's
Wow.
that's going to be an epic day. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I
Geez.
mean and I'm sure that once that gets opened, that you can start at the top of Mingus Mountain. I'm sure there'll be some outfitters coming in to do shuttle rides, shuttle you up to the top and let you ride
Hmm.
down, and and then. And you'd finish basically in Old Town Cottonwood, and there's plenty of restaurants there and breweries and things like that I talked about earlier that you could do. So a lot of there's the Verde has 300 miles of more planned. 14 are on the ground, and we're raising money right now to start. They're going to be building the Copper Chief Trail starting this fall. That's about 8 miles. That's going to link what they've been doing towards Cottonwood, Clarkdale, heading more towards Camp Verde, and it's going to connect to the Black Canyon Trail. This isn't the National Recreation Trail. This is the Mingus Black Canyon Trail that will eventually get you up to the top of Mingus Mountain. It's just going to be, we're just so excited about it because and that will help. The more trails to get in, are in the Verde Valley. And there's other things. There's the Sun Corridor Trail that's going to take you from Phoenix all the way up to Utah. That's going to come through the Verde Valley. There's there's trail development happening in Camp Verde, in Beaver Creek, in Cornville. I mean, it's the other communities in the Verde Valley are seeing people coming to Sedona to mountain bike, and they go, "We got incredible," and
Wow.
there's plenty of, like I said, only 17% of the land here is privately owned. So there's plenty of public land with easy access, and so trails are just exploding here. It's just I'm just so excited, and that we're at as Sedona, we're running out of space to build. Turkey Creek's about the last place around Sedona to expand. So now it's expanding throughout the Verde Valley. So, what was it? 714 square miles. That's our playground.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Well, of course, those are not all of the trail conversations that we had in 2021. There were a number of other Ride Like a Local interviews that we did with folks from British Columbia, from St. George, Utah, from Sun Valley, Idaho. And so if you missed any of those, be sure to go back and listen to them. We also talked to a number of folks about other advocacy issues, about trail building, and also just the environment in general. So be sure to go on Singletracks, where we've got the podcast nicely organized. Of course, you can also go back and see the whole list of shows we've done in the last year through your favorite podcast app. Well, next week, we're going to be sharing some of our favorite episodes in those other categories that we cover here, including progression, where we talk to skills and fitness coaches. We'll also share a little bit about mountain bike gear as we geek out on topics like saddles and how mountain bike clothing is produced. And then also some of my personal favorites. We're going to talk to folks from the mountain bike community. And so that includes racers and advocates and all kinds of folks. So you're going to want to tune in next week to hear those highlights as well. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.